Hello, it's Darren Moor again from the How to Survive Your Police Career website. Today's podcast is all about PIM, Post-Incident Management, and PIP, the Post-Incident Procedure. That process that bobbies may find themselves suddenly involved in after a death or serious injury following police contact, but often find a bit strange and probably quite alarming because no one's ever explained it to them before. So, allow me to explain it, because it is a good thing, even if, well, let's face it, it can be a bit unsettling when you've never experienced it before. To keep things simple, I'm going to be reading from the chapter I wrote on the subject in How to Survive Your Early Years in the Police Service, which goes pretty much like this. Sometimes things go wrong and a member of the public we're dealing with dies or gets seriously injured. We shouldn't be surprised, of course, when this happens, because many of the people that we deal with have incredibly self-destructive habits which can lead on to some unfortunate event. But then a question may be asked about whether we as individual bobbies or the police organisation as a whole are somehow to blame. Fortunately, post-incident management and the post-incident procedure are in place these days for supporting officers and staff involved in such an incident. In this podcast, we're going to discuss how these systems work, because if you suddenly find yourself involved in a procedure, they can appear rather daunting and actually quite sinister. But before we do that, let's put this into context by discussing why PIM and PIP were introduced in the first place. In days gone by, and certainly when I joined the service in the early 90s, if a member of the public died or got seriously hurt, any bobbies involved would generally have been told to just write up your statement. And so we would have. All officers sitting together in the report writing room, quaffing tea and coffee, and chatting as we scribbled away. Some around the table, though, might have been quieter than others because they were rather shook up by what had occurred. And others might have had trouble actually recalling what had happened because they were, in fact, still traumatised by the event. It probably wouldn't have helped if they were tired, being as the worst incidents, as you may have noticed, have a habit of occurring at the end of a first night shift. But there you go, the statements were produced, which tidies everything up nicely. Well, right up until the moment, that is, that questions were being asked about the actions of the officers, or the coroner was querying why this or that occurred. And how is it that the statements didn't, on review, appear to tally up with the other evidence, or seem to have been rushed or lacking in sense? Or why, instead, was it that the statements were too similar in terms of content? Had the officers colluded with each other when writing them? Is this some police cover-up? And that's the reason why we have PIM and PIP today, a really supportive process for you when the worst happens. PIM and PIP should occur after a death or serious injury following police involvement. It may also happen if an incident suggests significant failings in police command, or that the public were put in danger by police action. Classic scenarios might be a fatal road accident involving a police car, or a person shot by police, or someone dying in police custody following arrest. Other, less obvious incidents might be someone suffering life-changing injuries through trying to escape from bobbies trying to arrest them. Maybe jumping from an upstairs window when officers knocked on the front door, that type of thing. Or a druggie dying from an overdose a day or so after bobbies had done a welfare check on them. More often than not, it's plainly obvious to everybody involved that officers haven't done anything wrong. So don't go thinking that you're in trouble if your incident is PIM'd. The post-incident procedure is designed both to look after your welfare while also investigating on behalf of the state to establish what happened. And don't conclude either that you're automatically a suspect for a crime. If you were, then you would be told this and quite possibly arrested, and so entitled to all the rights of a suspect under PACE. Instead, in a PIP process, you're treated as a key police witness, a KPW. I'm sorry to overload you with all these abbreviations. So, what happens to key police witnesses during a post-incident procedure? Firstly, you'll be informed that the procedure has been called and that you and everybody else involved are to be taken to a post-incident management or PIM suite. Now this sounds quite alarming, doesn't it? I'm being carted off somewhere. Most officers who haven't been taught about PIP instantly assume that they're in trouble at this stage. A worry which isn't helped when they find themselves being given a conferring notice by the senior officer present. That's a verbal warning not to discuss the incident with their mates until instructed otherwise, and to keep their body-worn video on to confirm that they comply with this instruction. Try not to be alarmed. This is a normal procedure for every PIP. It's done to avoid any allegations of collusion between officers when en route to the suite. Depending on your force, you may discover that the PIM suite is some distance away, perhaps at a station or police premises you've never been to before. And of course that's something else that might unsettle you, going into the unknown. Don't be spooked though. Locations suitable for PIM suites may be few and far between, as they need to provide certain facilities and features. Ideally a central area large enough for everybody to congregate and with smaller rooms around it for meetings, but also be private enough for the KPWs to be looked after away from the hurly-burly of normal police business. You may find yourself on a bit of a journey to get there, your mind racing, your imagination going wild. When you do get there, you will be asked to remain in the central area while awaiting the arrival of the PIM manager. Invariably, there will be a delay because the manager, generally referred to as the PIM, might themselves have had to travel some distance and, if on call, might first have had to disentangle themselves from whatever they were dealing with before, like the duvet if it's the middle of the night. And that's something else to understand about the PIM process in general. Nothing ever happens quickly in a PIM process. Expect to be sitting around for ages. Depending on the size of your force, a PIM might be a full-time post, but more likely just a PIP-trained officer, like I was when I was in the service, or a member of staff working on a call-out rota. I've no doubt you'll find them very friendly, and they then take time to brief you on the PIP procedure. Briefings vary depending on who's given them, but in mine I will cover the following points. Firstly, whether anyone is hurt or needs to see a doctor straight away. Then, how the Police Federation have already been called and will be sending their own PIP-trained reps to be with you during the process. They probably would have arrived already. That the Federation would have routinely contacted their solicitors so that you can be given private legal advice before providing any account of the incident. How you will be offered the chance to clean up and have a change of clothes. And this is because sometimes key police witnesses arrive at the suite literally covered in blood and gore from the incident. That food and drink will be provided free of charge, and it always seems to be pizza. And how you're welcome to phone home, in private if you wish, and should shout up if you have any welfare concerns like kids that the PIM can help you with. And then an explanation of why we have PIP and the legal requirements around it. Now that's basically because the European Convention on Human Rights requires a state that signed up to the agreement, such as the UK, to investigate incidents of death or serious injury to one of their citizens in an effective and an accountable way. And how, in the UK, these kinds of investigations are conducted by the Independent Office of Police Conduct, the IOPC, more abbreviations, and the PIM will be acting as your liaison with them. How also, as part of this, it's important that any conferring between police witnesses is properly recorded, and that's why the PIM is assisted by an appointed officer to be responsible for this. And finally, how PIP is a voluntary process, but one that is supported by the Police Federation, which is why they have reps trained in the process. Now this is important. PIP is voluntary. Although you've been ordered to the suite, you don't have to stay there or take part in the PIP process. You're not under any compulsion, but as a now retired fellow officer who's seen it work in practice, I would advise that you did. And, as I said earlier, so would the Federation. But feel free to speak with them in private if you want to confirm this. Having explained all this stuff, the PIM will then describe how your account of the incident is to be recorded, and this is where things again differ greatly from what you're used to. Under normal circumstances, you might write a pocketbook account of the incident, tying it in with what you've seen on your body-worn video, and then write up a formal statement from there. In the PIP process, however, you will at first only provide a personal initial account, the real bare bones of your involvement, and your honestly held belief at the time that any force was used, but without watching any CCTV or body-worn video. This personal initial account, or PIA, might be very short, perhaps only half a page of A4, and cover such fundamentals as who was driving the police car, who was the passenger, who knocked on the front door before the person jumped out the bedroom window, who, dare I say it, fired the bullet. And you'll only provide this PIA following Federation and legal advice and any medical treatment required. Now, the rationale for providing only a short PIA at this stage is to protect your welfare. With traumatic events, we often not only find ourselves overwhelmed by the event, but also suffer a distorted recollection of what actually occurred. It's only in the days following that we properly remember what happened, which, incidentally, can explain the inconsistencies that you sometimes see in victim statements taken straight after an event. To avoid this distorted recollection scenario, KPWs won't be asked to provide detailed statements for a couple of days. 2 sleeps is a good general policy, and only after being provided full legal advice and the opportunity to view any video of the incident. At that time, the PIM, an appointed officer, will meet with you and the other KPWs again, along with your Fed reps, supported by their solicitor. And it's only then that you commit yourself to a fully evidential account of what occurred. A question that sometimes comes up is, what if I'm not in the Federation? Federations in different forces have different practices. Some might offer assistance to non-members at the PIM suite, but not afterwards, while others might not offer any assistance at all. From my involvement with PIM, I sometimes hear horror stories of officers not in the Fed having to self-finance tens of thousands of pounds, and sometimes much more, of legal fees when accused of criminal offences or gross misconduct following a death, or dealing with the civil claims that follow. Considering the types of incidents we attend and the people we deal with, I would suggest that you would need a pretty good reason not to be in the Fed and so have that help available if something nasty happened to you. But anyhow, the PIM, an appointed officer, will pass over your statements to the IOPC and then remain as liaison between you and them throughout the investigation. Sometimes, in less serious incidents, the IOPC will allow your force's PSD to investigate the matter on their behalf. But anyhow, let's take a few moments now to discuss ways in which things can go wrong with PIM and PIP. Unfortunately, the process isn't widely known about amongst officers or even supervisors, and that means that sometimes things can go wrong in the procedure. It may be that the PIP isn't called until some hours after the event, as it's only then that it occurs to someone up the food chain that it might have been a good idea. But let's face it, that's how things are in the police, isn't it? By then, however, you may have already discussed the incident, or colluded, as it might be claimed, with your colleagues. Or you may have written up your pocketbook with an account that you realise later involves some distorted recollection of the event caused through stress. Or perhaps someone's been daft enough to post some stupid update on social media. You probably know who the likely suspects for this are on your team, don't you? If it's a serious poleac, then other officers, supervisors or crash investigation may have arrived on scene and asked that inevitable question, so what happened then? Or if it's an incident in custody, you may have been told to put an entry on the custody record. But, whatever it is, stop. When it becomes obvious to you that death or serious injury has occurred, don't discuss it or write anything down until you've clarified with your supervisors or control room whether a PIP is to be called. In fact, make that inquiry over the radio so that it's all recorded. And leave your body-worn video running to avoid allegations of collusion. It may even be that you need to explain to people what a PIP is. Well, thank heavens you've been smart enough to listen to this podcast. And so in conclusion, although the PIP process may seem rather unsettling on top of what has already been a bad day out, try to appreciate that much of it is designed to look after your welfare. Be aware also that many PIM managers only volunteer for the role because they want to help their colleagues out in the aftermath of that very bad day. And believe me, PIM manager is a job full of aggravation and not one that you get much thanks for. But in general terms, trust the process because it's there for a reason. And also trust your PIMs. They're not the enemy. Sure, they've got to run the process with integrity because it's about evidence capture, but they're also looking after you at a time when you may be pretty fragile. In the old days, before PIM, Bobby's had it a lot rougher. Speak to some of the old timers on the station and I'm sure they can tell you some real horror stories. So, yeah, embrace the process and be thankful that we have it these days. Well, thanks for listening. As I said earlier, the chapter I've just read from comes from my book, How to Survive Your Early Years as a Police Officer, where there's loads of stuff for the new Bobby. Check out the website, howtosurviveyourpolicecareer.com, where you'll find a podcast and even a video of me explaining the range of subjects that we cover in the book. But basically, it's everything you need to know to get you through those first tricky years of service without too many disasters. And there's also videos and podcasts for my two other books. We've got the How to Survive Your Relationship with a Police Officer one, which is written for your partner, and it explains to them just how grim your job can be and provides practical advice about how the pair of you can make the best of it together. And also our main health book, How to Survive Your Police Career, which has everything a Bobby needs to know about sleep and nutrition on shifts, mental health and trauma, exercise, injury recovery, bad dreams, eyesight. In fact, everything you need to know when doing this chaotic job. All the issues and all the practical answers. And I think I'd better say this now, I apologise in advance for the production values on the videos. As it turns out, they're not the easiest things to record. Hopefully you find them funny to watch, even if that wasn't the intention. And a final thing before we finish. We're always keen to work with any police services or federations, local or national, or police commissioners, or any other organisations out there actually, that want to collaborate with us on creating an app or other materials for getting the information from our books out to officers and staff. Perhaps you'd like them downloaded to your troops' work phones so that they can access this information whenever they want. All these things are possible, so just get in touch. We've done the research and come up with the practical answers, but more importantly, we present it in a way that the average Bobby is going to read it, because that's the essential difference, isn't it? Police services are always putting out health information to their troops, but I'm not sure that anyone ever reads it, because it tends to be a bit generic and bland, often produced by people who aren't police and so don't really understand their issues. Blowing my own trumpet for a moment, I was police for 30 years, all of it frontline and all of it on earlies, lates and nights. I positively revel in all the issues and know what works and what doesn't from personal experience. All the information in our books is relevant and written against that test of, is some knackered Bobby or civilian working 24/7 going to be interested in this stuff? And the answer's, yeah, they will be, if we can make it funny, interesting and as connected to their lives as possible. And that's what we do. But anyhow, thanks again for listening. Please share this podcast with others. Trust PIM, because it's there for a purpose. And until next time, from How to Survive Your Police Career, stay safe and be lucky. Bye-bye.